Today from the global lane, Iran gets closer to developing a nuclear bomb. What's Trump's next move? A historic agreement moves Sudan closer to democracy. Bye-bye Islamic law? On the home front, Democratic presidential candidates promise all kinds of goodies in the battle for their votes. But what do Black Americans really want? And privacy rights eroding. How Big Brother is using facial recognition without your permission. And it's all right here on the global lane. The United States has presented its case against Iran to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and it appears the world community is divided over a possible response. The Islamic Republic has announced it is now ignoring the limits that the country agreed to honor in its 2015 nuclear deal. That nuclear deal committed Iran to a maximum level of no more than 3.67%. And one report from Iran said the country has now enriched uranium at a level of 4.5%. 90% is the level of enrichment needed for a nuclear weapon. So Iran is far from that, but it demonstrates the government's willingness to proceed down a risky road. The regime is hoping its actions will motivate the Europeans to bust U.S. sanctions and do business with Tehran. Well, joining us to provide his experience and insights is the founder and executive chairman of the Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney. Mr. Gaffney served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear Forces and Arms Control Policy during the Reagan administration. So, Frank, based on the response of the IAEA, it seems that only the United States and Britain are voicing serious concerns about this. How surprised are you by the lack of concern by Europe and other countries?
Not terribly surprised, I have to say, Gary. This is par for the course. The rest of the world is either assuming that we'll take care of the problem or, to varying degrees, complicit in the problem. There are countries like Russia and China which consider Iran to be essentially allies or clients, perhaps, saying, we can do business with Iran. All we need to do is just continue whatever arrangement is necessary to do that. And they're good with whatever the Iranians might actually be up to, despite the fact that it is a threat to them as well as to us. So I'm not surprised at the sort of lackadaisical attitude, if you will, but I think it's a powerful indictment, really, of these governments because they're either in Iran's pocket or hoping that Iran will be in theirs.
Frank, most experts say that reaching 20% is the real level of concern here because then they can quickly get to 90%, the level of enrichment needed for a nuclear bomb. So is it a bit premature then to be sounding the alarm now? Isn't Iran far from that level?
I don't think it's premature at all, Gary. The Iranians, we know, among other things, from the trove of documents that the Israelis brilliantly managed to sneak out of Iran, that the regime has been at this for over 20 years. Incrementally, you get a very rapid escalation in terms of the enrichment once you begin the process of engaging in it.
And I know President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, others are still hoping to get the Iranians to renegotiate the GCPA or JCPA. What are the chances? What will need to be done to get them back to the bargaining table, Frank?
Well, I think if there is going to be a further negotiation, it will be on the basis of the Iranians concluding that that's the only way they're going to survive. The maximum pressure campaign that the president's brought to bear, economic sanctions and other measures to really constrain the regime, are unquestionably having a very palpable effect on them. The problem that I have, quite honestly, is even if the Iranian regime, as it is presently configured, got back into negotiations with us, I don't expect, frankly, any more likelihood of success. Maybe a slightly better agreement, but the reality is they're going to continue beavering away as long as this regime is in power on a nuclear weapons program. And by the way, ballistic missile programs as well, with which to deliver these weapons once they get their hands on them to places further and further removed from them, Israel most immediately, Europe, and of course, in due course, if not right away, us. All of this is to say, I personally believe that the only hope for avoiding the grave peril that is associated with a nuclear weapon in the hands of folks like the Ayatollah Khamenei is to have that set of hands no longer in a position of power. In other words, to help the Iranian people bring about the change of regime that is vitally in their interest as well as in ours.
But
I don't
we're
think
not
this
hearing...
requires our boots on the ground by any means, but I do think there are things that we could do to help them, and we must.
Well, we're not hearing this president talk much about Iranian regime change. I mean, he actually sounded like he could deal with them if they sign an agreement. So should he be talking about regime change?
I personally think that it's what we need in the way of a policy. Whether he decides to talk about it or not, I leave to him. But I think the main point is we shouldn't be under any illusion. This threat is going to metastasize further to the great detriment, as I say, of the people of Iran as well as to our own.
Okay, Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Security Policy, thank you for sharing your insights.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Wouldn't it be great if you could just hop on a plane and fly to a third world country and hand out food and medicine to the needy? And wouldn't it be great if some of those people came to know Jesus as their Savior because of your help? And wouldn't it be great if you could help out people like this all around the world every day? Wouldn't that make you feel great? And what if you could do all of this without having to leave your home or write monthly checks? Well, you can. Partner with CBN and you can help spread the gospel all around the world and make it a better place. And when you sign up for Pledge Express, your contribution will be deducted from your bank account every month automatically. It's a safe and simple way to make a difference. Plus, wouldn't it be great to get life-changing teachings every month from Pat and Gordon? When you sign up for Pledge Express, you'll save time and money, and you won't just sit around and watch the world go by. You'll help change it for the glory of God. Now, wouldn't that be great?
When you care, souls are set free. When you give, lives are made new. When you share, eternal life begins. When we all come together to love, miracles happen.
After 7 months of protests, the people of Sudan may be a few steps closer to realizing their dream of having a democratic government. As Americans celebrated their Independence Day, Sudanese were in the street celebrating an agreement reached between opposition leaders and Sudan's Transitional Military Council. The military ousted strongman dictator Omar al-Bashir. He's in prison now facing charges of corruption and foreign money laundering. He's still wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity committed in Darfur. The agreement reached calls for a 3-year and 3-month power-sharing deal, a civilian-led council comprised of military and civilian representatives. Here to fill us in with more is someone who has worked with Sudan and extensively in South Sudan over the years, Tina Ramirez. She's founder and president of Hardwired. So, Tina, what do you think of this power-sharing deal? Will it work?
You know, I think that that's yet to be seen, but it's definitely one of the biggest hopes that we've seen in a long time for Sudan, really since the CPA and since the referendum on the South Sudan and the peaceful transfer of power there. So I think that this is a great time of hope, and that the people of Sudan are, I mean, the amount of people that came out in the streets last week that really forced the military's hand to finally actually make a deal was pretty significant. And I think that that really sent a wake-up call both to the military but also to the world that this isn't a regime that you know can continue in any form, whether Bashir is in prison or operating through his military men.
Well, I was going to say, I know thousands of Sudanese took to the streets not only last week, but in recent months. They even shut down businesses in protest. At least 100 were killed by the military, others injured. So other than that, what caused the Transitional Military Council, you think, finally to relent and agree to this deal?
Well, I think that because it got so bloody towards the end, with the brutality that we saw last week against the civilians was pretty severe. You had dozens that were raped and killed. And I think that finally sent a message to some of the Saudis and the other governments that were backing the Sudanese regime that the status quo wasn't going to work and that the world wasn't going to sit by and let this happen.
And I know some of the opposition forces and leaders of the protest movement complained that although Omar al-Bashir is in prison now, many of the same people who helped him persecute Christians, the people of Darfur, are still holding power. So how does this agreement change that?
I think that's what's going to yet to be seen. The reality is that the new government and the way that they've set it up is that the military will have the presidency for the first kind of 18 to 21 months, and then it'll transfer over to the civilians. The civilians are supposed to have control of a significant part of the cabinet and all of the parliament. But all of that has yet to actually be written down and seen in writing. And so this week we should be seeing that. And really it's when those people come into place and start holding the military accountable for those actions, both in Darfur and the Nuba Mountains and many other places throughout Khartoum. We're going to see really what kind of government is going to form here. So I think there's the accountability that needs to take place within this joint government, but also what kind of new laws are they going to put in place that are going to protect future rights of the people?
Tina, what do you see happening now? Will the agreement hold? What has to be done?
Well, I think what needs to be done is that a lot of the power brokers that were engaged in this negotiation need to stay engaged, especially the United States and the African Union leaders, and really hold the military accountable to ensuring that the peace does go through. This is a really significant peace deal. We had 3 decades of a dictator, and there's a lot of entrenched bureaucracy that's going to need to be overturned and transitioned. And so it's really important that the international community stays in place. There were many civil society leaders that took part in helping to draft the Constitution that was never voted upon in Khartoum after the South had seceded. And so I think that there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to make sure that there is a constitution that is secular, something that the protesters were guaranteed in that agreement last Thursday. And so it needs to be a secular constitution that protects the rights of people. And then they need to work towards laws and towards justice for all the people that have been just brutally attacked in not only recent months, but under this regime.
And finally, what does this mean for the country's Christians? Their churches have been destroyed. Many have been arrested over the years. Will Sharia law be lifted? Are things better now? Will they be better in the future?
One of the things that the protesters demanded was that it was a secular constitution. And, in Sudan, it's a really unique instance in that a lot of the people that have been protesting for years in civil society, they're Muslims and they're Christians, and they've always worked together towards really defending religious freedom for all people. And I think that that's something that they're going to put a strong emphasis on, because they know whether they're Muslim or Christian, they've all really been brutally treated under Sharia and under the Hadid laws and the Islamization of the country that took place under President Bashir. So many people have suffered, and I think that's a priority of the protesters, and it's something that definitely will take front and center stage in the coming months and years in this process. But it's something that the international community needs to make sure is demanded and is ensured in that process, because they've often overlooked it in other countries.
Tina Ramirez of Hardwired, thank you for joining us.
I am Regent's first ROTC graduate student.
When you give, smiles grow bigger. When you care, homes are happier. When you comfort, the hurt goes away. When we all come together to love, miracles happen.
Democratic presidential candidates are in an all-out battle to win over African-American voters. Black voter turnout declined sharply during the last presidential election, falling from a record high of 66.5% for 2012 to 59.6% in 2016. So here's what they're trying to do to motivate them to vote, and especially for them as they vie to become their party's presidential nominee. Polls show Joe Biden as the top choice of black voters. So at the first Democratic presidential debate, candidate Kamala Harris took him on over the issue of busing and desegregation. And now she's proposing that the government spend $100 billion to provide low-income black people with the money they need to buy homes. She says it would help 4 million people to deal with, quote, the racial wealth gap. Meanwhile, presidential candidate Cory Booker is still looking at the possibility of paying reparations to African-American descendants of slavery. He says it would address policies that are, quote, rooted in white supremacy, that continue to, quote, erode black communities and perpetuate racism. Well, joining us to provide some insights on this and the Democratic candidate's strategy is Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Raynard Jackson. He's founder and chairman of Black Americans for a Better Future, a super PAC working to get more blacks to join the GOP. So, Mr. Jackson, thank you for joining us. Is this the way to a better future for black Americans, more free stuff?
No, it's not, Gary, and thank you for having me on your show. And I talk to blacks all across the country, and I spent a lot of time with a lot of friends of mine in South Carolina. And to be honest with you, Gary, they are offended at the Democrats' approach to going after their vote. They're not looking for handouts and freebies. They're looking for policy that's going to make their lives better. They don't want a lot of government intrusion into their life. All they want is to make sure the playing field is equal and get out of their way, and they'll figure out the rest for themselves.
You know, this reminds me a bit of the 2012 presidential campaign. Remember the Obama phones?
You got Obama phone?
Yes, everybody in Cleveland, low minority, got Obama phone. Keep Obama in president, you know?
Now, in all fairness, Lifeline is a government program that was started by Ronald Reagan to provide low-income people with phone service. It reportedly grew from about $800 million, a program of $800 million when President Obama came into office in 2009, to more than $2 billion by the end of his first term. So, Mr. Jackson, why can't Democrats attract black voters without promising them a bunch of stuff? It seems like we're creating a nation of victims and dependents rather than self-sufficient victors.
Yeah, Gary, it's very simple. The Democratic Party has no substantive policy issues that would appeal to the black community. So what, you're going to go into the black community talking about homosexuality and transgender issues? That's a loser. You're going to talk about amnesty for illegals? Well, that's a loser. You're going to talk about increasing the minimum wage? Well, that's a loser. So what do? You try to get them emotionally riled up, those who are lower information voters. But the black community is more intelligent than the Democrats want to give them credit for. And I tell you, the policy that they're advocating are anathema to the black community. And so I want your audience to realize that there are more black folks who think like me than what you see on MSNBC and CNN. Black folks believe in substantive policies. Every time the government gets involved in the black community lives, Gary, we end up getting destroyed. Welfare, the Tuskegee experiment, et cetera. So what we need in the black community is less government intervention in our lives and just more fairness in how we approach our lives.
And we know there's a wealth disparity. Black income's about half the amount of whites. And why is that? How should that be addressed?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Gary, because you can just look at raw data and come up with any conclusion whatsoever. For example, I often tell people the reason folks on minimum wage are having problems raising their families are because that's not the purpose of minimum wage, for you to have 1 or 2 kids, never been married, for you to raise a family on that. And so blacks in general, we have a lower number of blacks in college degrees. We have blacks who are concentrated into dense population cities that are in the inner city areas who are now being forced out to the suburbs. So when you look at home ownership in the black community, Gary, a lot of it has nothing to do with race, but more to do with choices black folks make as to where they want to live. And President Trump often mentions that under his watch, black unemployment is down to the lowest levels ever in America, and twice last year it hit a record of, I think, about 5.9%. But I have a feeling just touting those numbers will not be enough for Republicans to attract black voters. What else must they do? Well, you're right, Gary. The president had a great story to tell relative to the black community. Where they have fallen short is the ability to effectively communicate with the black community by way of having credible black surrogates like a Herman Cain going into the black community, talking about the success of this administration. Republicans tend to want to showcase blacks that make them feel good versus blacks who have credibility in the black community. And so if the president and his administration get credible blacks to tout his success in the black community, we can go from 8% in 2016 of the black vote to 15% or higher. And if the president gets north of 15%, Gary, mathematically, Democrats cannot win a national election, period. And I saw where BET's Robert Johnson praised the president. He's a Democrat, and he praised the president for the economy and what he's doing to on black unemployment. Also, I understand he said that the party's become very left, a little too left, and it has to moderate if it expects to win. Who do you think has the best chance with black voters on the Democratic side? Of those in the race now, you have to tip your hat to Joe Biden simply because of his relationship with Obama. But on substance, none of them are saying anything that would be appealing to the black community during a Democratic primary. So basically, it's the lesser of the two evils. Kamala Harris is just so far out of the mainstream in the black community. Cory Booker, he's to the left of Kamala Harris. And so they go in there talking about, again, homosexuality, amnesty for illegals, increasing the minimum wage. Those are all non-starters in the black community. Okay, we'll have to wait and see how it goes. Raynor Jackson, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, founder and chairman of Black Americans for a Better Future. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Gary.
Roman soldiers destroy the Second Temple of Jerusalem. Centuries of eyewitnesses say the temple treasures survived. But where are they?
They went from Jerusalem to Rome, Rome to Carthage, Carthage to Byzantium.
Historians are silent about what happened to it next.
This is a bad omen.
Hosted and narrated by Gordon Robertson.
So does it still exist today?
CBN Documentaries presents a story of mystery.
Where is it?
Calamity.
Most of the victims were butchered.
And destiny.
The possibility to dig is impossible.
Take a journey to find Treasures of the Second Temple, a CBN Documentaries presentation, coming July 8th.
brother is watching you and collecting as much information as possible about you. Your web browsing, online shopping habits, possible phone conversations. And now there's more. A group called Fight for the Future says the federal government is using facial recognition technology to watch Americans, and all without your permission. On Capitol Hill, here's Jim Jordan, Republican congressman from Ohio.
20 states have given their Bureau of Motor Vehicles, Department of Motor, the database, driver's license database, they've just given access to that to the FBI. No individual signed off on that when they renewed their driver's license, got their driver. They didn't sign any waiver saying, oh, it's okay to turn my information, my photo over to the FBI. No elected officials voted to allow that to happen.
China has been using similar technology for some time now. Cameras, along with facial recognition software, are being used to collect data on Chinese citizens, especially Christians who attend unregistered churches. The government uses advanced technology to watch who comes and goes and to learn about their activities. Communist Party officials then use the collected data against citizens who do not embrace the views of their party. Like China, is the United States now heading down the road of totalitarianism? If not now, perhaps soon. It's all being done in the name of national security, to protect us from terrorists and other bad guys. Thanks, but no thanks. I don't know about you, but I think protecting American privacy rights, as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, is more important than protecting our society from often overstated terror threats. Sure, our country faces threats to its security, but if we're to remain a free nation, the right to privacy is one constant we need, and our founding fathers knew that. Just a reminder, the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution says this: the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be searched. That applies, folks, not only to FISA warrants being issued against presidential campaign workers under false pretenses, but also to your driver's license photo and information being stored in a government database. So honoring the Constitution, freedom, and privacy, that's crucial if we're to remain free for now and in the future. Well, that's it from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.